Right, what is good, people? So this is how I would go over setting up an initial diet phase for a client that we need to recomp. So if this is for anyone that's trying to reverse out of a diet, this is going to work for you because you're already going to understand where your calories are at to try and get to a really low body fat percentage. So this isn't something I would do for you. This is for someone who hasn't been tracking their food at all. We have no idea their input, their output, and we're literally just trying to set up an initial phase so that we can go into a recomposition phase where we actually increase food up to their actual maintenance calories, or if they're in a position where we then want to try and diet them down from there, or we can make a decision to actually put them into a gaining phase, depending on where their body fat percentage is at and what their actual specific need is and what their goals are, right? So for protein, if they are at 20%, I would, body fat that is, I would take it to 1.7 grams of protein per kilo of body weight, okay? And then if they were on the leaner side, so 12% sort of range. If they're anywhere below that, they would normally be reversing out of a diet. So you would take them just straight back up to maintenance. But with this, we might want to get leaner, so I'll then give them 2.2 grams per kilo, okay? And to sort of reset, we will just keep increasing food through the carbohydrates until they get up to their maintenance. Maintenance means where they actually stay in the same amount of weight for a prolonged period of time with their output and the incoming calories, okay? And then for carbohydrates, I'll use the same scale again, but for 2.2 per kilo of body weight, okay, if they are 20% body fat, and then 3.4 grams if they are 12%. So anywhere between that middle of the scale, I would then obviously go in the middle of that scale. So if we are going to go, say, the midpoint is 16%, okay? So what I would then do is roughly, so the midpoint of this, let's say 2 grams, so 2 times, let's say this person is 15% and they're 80 kilo, times 80, that gives us 160 grams of protein, okay, that we want them to be eating per day. And then if we're going to go in the mid-range of this, we're going to go 80 times 2.8. So this is our energy stores. Our glycogen stores is what's going to give us the energy to actually train, to get through the day-to-day life. Okay, glycogen is our energy source. Protein is what's going to help us muscle photosynthesis, actually maintain our muscle and build more extra tissue. Okay, but actually building tissue normally comes from being in a surplus, but we need protein alongside that for the photosynthesis. Okay, so we're going to have carbs 224. Okay. Forget my dodgy handwriting, right? And then I normally go, right, fats is going to help hormone production. It's going to help with so many other factors. If we have no fat within our diet, we are literally going to be no energy and our hormones are going to be unregulated and that can lead to other problems. So normally I go 30%. So what I would do is I go on MyFitnessPal. I would put the entry of how much protein and carbs is, and then, so if you go to goals on MyFitnessPal, and then go and put your calories in, your carbohydrates, etc., etc. Now, don't pay attention to the calories, because the calories are going to be completely dependent on what carb sources you use, what protein sources you use, etc., etc. So carbs, we're going 224, protein, 160. Yeah, cool. So that gives us 72 grams of fat, okay? Now this is just initially for an initial stage, okay? You might want to decrease this, you might want to increase this, depending on how the person's body reacts. So I prefer working off low fats, so normally I work off about 50 grams of fat for a training day, but we'll increase them on rest day to help with recovery and take it up to 60 grams, okay? But this is where I would start with for someone with this body fat percentage, this initial weight, so this is where I would go, right? Because of how much they weigh, if I've got anything above 140 grams of protein, I'm going to split it into 5 meals, okay? So, around your training window, I will always 60% of the carbohydrates. Okay, so if I work out what 60% of my carbs are, okay, so 224, take away 40%, so that gives us 134 grams, okay? So that is our training window carbs, okay? And then I would split that into 60-40 again. 60% pre, 40% post, okay? That's going to give us the decent amount of carbohydrates to fuel the session and then recover, okay? So then let's take away 40%. Oh, sugar. Right, so 80 grams in the pre. So, okay. So in our pre-workout meal, we are going to have 80 grams of carbs. And in your pre-workout meal, all your carbohydrates that you want to use, you want to be fast reacting carbohydrates. So no potatoes, anything like that. It's going to slow down. It's going to slow down how much our body actually gets the insulin and uses it. Okay, so pre 80 carb. All right. We want to split the protein then post. Post is going to be then 20, 54. Okay, and because we have got, how much protein have we got again? So we've got 160 grams of protein. Okay, I want to split that evenly across my day. Okay, so I'm going to have 32 grams protein. Okay, and the only fat source that I would use pre-workout is something such as maybe 10 grams of dark chocolate, because it actually helps expand veins. So if I was going to have, say, I would normally use rice-based carbohydrates as well pre-workout. Why? Because they actually respond the best, they get into the blood cell quicker, and then we can actually utilize it quicker as well. But if you wanted to have rice, the vegetable choice that I would have is beetroot, because it also helps expand veins. It helps with actual blood flow as well. So that's actually going to increase the rate that our body responds to a pump. Okay, I would keep all fats, other than if you had dark chocolate, away from your training window at all. So what I would then do is, in the other 3 meals, the 72 grams of fat, I'm going to divide by 3. Okay. That's 24 grams in each one of these meals. Okay, so let's go meal 1. Meal 2. Meal 3. Okay, and fats 24 grams for all 3. I'm not going to count any indirect fats. So oats, they have fats in, but I'm not going to count them into what I would have it is in the pre-meal. Okay, I might take away 5 grams and put it here, but majority of the time it's just going to go across these 3 meals here. Okay, then obviously we've already utilized 80 plus 54. So 134 carbs are gone, and we've got 224 for the day. So then I'm going to split, so that's 90 left for the day. So I'm probably going to have 30 grams of carbs within each meal here. So 30 carb, 30 carb, right? Split nice and evenly. across the day, right? And then we're going to have the rest of our protein. Am I being? Yes, I'm being special. That did not look like a 32. Jesus Christ. So that is basically the split that I would do across the day. If you have digestion problems, so you find that digestion is normally an issue for you, okay, what I would do is I'd take some of the protein out from this meal here and then split it across these meal here. Why? Because protein is the second micronutrient to actually slow down the digestive system. Fats slow down the most, so that's why we want to have them outside these meals, because it makes us feel us fuller for longer, mean that we can train, and it's going to get into the digest. We're going to be able to utilize it quick. We're going to be able to recover quickly because it's not slowing down digestion here. Okay. Now, so that is basically how I would split it across the day. Now, if I was going to look at how to actually set up everything else, we also need to look at micronutrition as well. And the biggest micronutrition that we want to utilize is our fiber. Okay, our fiber intake is very, very important. Okay, so I would make sure if this is so in a pre-meal, okay, if you're not having a chicken and rice based meal, I would go cream of rice or oats. That's how I would prefer to set it up, and I would go blueberries. Okay, so 100 gram of blueberries is about, let's say, oh no, I spelled that wrong. 12 gram of carb, okay? So 12 grams of carbs is already coming from your fiber source. And then in a post-workout, I would do the same for pineapple. So 100 gram of pineapple is another 12 gram of carbs. So you're also getting in your micronutrition, but I would also have veg in every single meal that is meat-based. Every meat-based meal has to have some veg in it. So that's another way you guys setting it up. And then I would also make sure that I have at least 4 different sources of protein a day. Okay, so as we want our fats to be higher here, I would probably say, right, I would say what, as a fat source for this here, you might want to utilize something like a red meat or a salmon, fish-based sort of protein source. And then I would have whey within this one here and chicken here, okay? It depends what you want. Is like some people, depending on how you order it, your post-workout might be your last meal. So that's absolutely perfect. But if you aren't having that as the last meal, this might end up be like a yogurt bowl. So you can utilize Greek yogurt, which is also going to be another protein source that you can utilize. And you want to have multiple different types of carbohydrates. And you want slow reacting carbohydrates in this window here. Okay, so slow reacting carbohydrates, something like your potato. Okay, so that is actually going to create a happy hormone called serotonin, which is going to make you feel fuller for longer. You can also have a lot more for a lot less calories. So that is how I would set up an initial diet phase. Okay, what you want to do once you set this up and you've got everything ready, okay, this will put you in about a 20 to 30% deficit. And so what you're going to notice in that first couple of weeks is a lot of water retention leaving the body because you're having digestible foods that your body can utilize correctly. So that's the first thing you're going to notice. You're going to notice fat then doesn't start to come off until like week 2. Then you start to see bloating go down, etc., etc. Right? I would do this phase by pushing as many carbohydrates a week. So protein stays the same. Okay, fats stay the same, but you're going to increase carbohydrates until the person gets, or yourself, gets to the point where they hit their maintenance, right? But what you need to do is you need to understand how much the body can take. So if I was to add in 20 grams of carbs, okay, and the client still lost a kilo, the next week I'll put in 30 grams, okay, until that rate of loss actually decreased, and then I know what I can actually add in. And this phase takes as long as it takes. But the importance of this phase is then, say the client started at 15%, they might lose 2-3%, okay? And then they are in a good position to start a cut. Because if you're a male, you should not be cutting unless you are 13% and below, okay? I would say for a male, you don't really want to go below the 10% mark unless you're a competitor. If you're just a normal lifestyle person, it's perfectly fine just to be stuck there. Whereas if you're a female, anything from 16 to 22 is perfect to start a bulk. Anything above that 22% mark, I wouldn't. The reason why is because your body's insulin sensitivity is decreased. Your body's insulin sensitivity is decreased. You're actually less likely and able to take on those carbohydrates, and the body utilize them to grow more muscle. So if you finish this phase by pushing out 20-30 grams of carbs a week, you get to maintenance 7-8 weeks, and you're lean in that position, then you can start a bulk if that's what your target is to gain more tissue. Whereas if you're not, okay, then I would then go into a cut, get insulin sensitivity on point by being lean, and then you can decide what you want to do from there. And that is how I would set up an initial diet phase.